before we give you details, let me tell you that traditionally we talk about the 30,000-foot view. Well, today this may be the 100,000-foot view, because if I were to sit here and itemize everything that we've dealt with during this investigation, we would be here all afternoon. So I want you to understand that I believe in our democracy and our capitalistic society. Making a private business profitable is good for all of us. However, I also believe that we should never, ever, ever profit on the backs of our children. And we know that the residential programs for the Department of Juvenile Justice are entirely outsourced to for-profit companies. So their primary duty and responsibility, is it to look out for the best interest of the children, or is it to make a profit? I would suggest to you today, after you hear what I have to say, that these for-profit companies were not interested in our children. They were not interested in the juveniles who were sent there by the state of Florida to receive programs and training and education and safe incarceration while they learned that there was a better way to live life. What you'll find out is that they cut corners, that they did not report. They did not report the most heinous acts that were occurring to children. And the reason they didn't do this, in the words of one state of Florida employee, was if they were transparent, if they complied with a law, if they complied with PREA, which is a federal requirement, if they complied with DCF's policies, practices, and laws, then certainly Department of Juvenile Justice would not and could not renew their contracts for services. And at the same time, what I will give you today suggests that the Department of Juvenile Justice did not provide checks and balances and appropriate oversight, for if they did, they would have discovered what we discovered. Because the way we discovered this information was from the people that worked there, and from the victims, and from the suspect children. DJJ was more than amply warned of the G4S failures, and G4S owned these residential programs. They were more than amply warned on several occasions and told to correct. And in addition to being warned by us, there was a grand jury presentment that they denied, they defended, they ran, they hid, rather than just admit that there's problems and we have to fix it. So let's start from the beginning and see if you don't concur with my opening statements. It's August the 17th, 2013. There was a riot at the Youth Academy, Highlands Youth Academy, which is outside of Avon Park, but inside of corporate Polk County, inside our county jurisdiction. On that particular night, we sent approximately 150 law enforcement officers there to get the situation back under control. Not only did I send deputies and supervisors, and Highlands County sent deputies and supervisors, and the Florida Highway Patrol sent their troopers to assist us. We saw a riot there. I personally went. I saw a riot. And at that time, I stood behind this podium and I told each and every one of you that I saw a riot. The next week, then Secretary Wansley Waters stood up and said, there was no riot. And she couldn't understand why the sheriff's deputies asked the guards, the juvenile guards, to leave the facility and leave the juveniles unsupervised. Are you kidding me? She said that publicly. When in fact what we found were the guards huddling in the corner, the place being totally and utterly destroyed. The estimation was about $350,000 damages. They came back and said, oh, there was only $35,000 damage or some ridiculous number like that, yet the place was uninhabitable. Once we quelled and calmed the disturbance that night, there were 60 youth or juveniles in the program that we discovered needed to be arrested and charged with rioting. DJJ nor the contractor had the appropriate infrastructure in place to separate and house these wayward youth. You see, for if they had the infrastructure in place, it would cut into the profit margin. So we took the 60 youth that were charged and placed them into a dorm separated by sight and sound at our county jail from all other inmates in order to appropriately give them a safe place where they could not only be arrested, but where they were safe. Now, you understand, they didn't have the infrastructure to deal with the kids that were misbehaving. Yet G4S had a 5-year, $40 million contract to run that one facility. So let's fast forward. August 20th, and they were in total denial that it even occurred, even though we tried to work with their staff and said, you have major problems here. So now it's December 2014. An employee, a guard, a youth counselor, whatever nomenclature you want to use, drove 30 minutes from the Avon Park Highlands Youth Academy to our frost-proof station to report being battered by juvenile inmates in the Highlands Youth Academy. And we go, why are you showing up here now? And they said, well, I am prohibited from calling law enforcement to report that I'm being beat up or battered while on duty. They say, they being Norma Wynn, who's the facilitator, facility administrator, or you might think warden of the prison or the top person, said, nope, no injuries to staff, no report. They had to show up on their own time in order to report that they were being beat on by the juvenile inmates. That's unbelievable. Norma said, well, that's Department of Juvenile Justice policy. Well, we checked into that, and that wasn't the juvenile justice policy at all. So we once again talked about the importance of reporting to us when criminal conduct occurred. Now we're to February 15th, or February 2015 and March 2015. There is a juvenile inmate by the name of Charles Spicy Bell. He attempted to escape on 2 different occasions. They never reported the escape attempt. They called him out of area. Well, I guess that's accurate. If you start climbing over the fence, I guess you would be out of the area. On his 3rd attempt, Charles Spicy Bell, on March the 7th, was able to get away. He fled. But by DJJ policy, they can wait up to 2 hours before they call us about an escape. Well, they called Norma. When Norma, who is once again the warden of the facility, when she arrives, they can't find him, they notify us. 4 hours later and a mile away from the facility, we arrest him. Keep in mind, that was his third attempt. So you go, well, why didn't they detain him? Well, they don't have any place to detain him. He was totally out of control, and they had no infrastructure. In March 2015, Norma was told specifically by more than one of our folks, our supervisors, listen, you have got to comply with Florida state statutes. You have absolutely got to report criminal conduct. And Norma said, I'm following DJJ protocol. She ignored us and went on with her practice. All of this time we're working with our state attorney's office. And in June of 2015, after receiving testimony, our grand jury issued a scathing report of the Highlands Youth Academy and the protocols and processes that were occurring. And let me highlight just a couple of those, but we have the entire grand jury presentment for you. Quote, the Highlands Youth Academy is a failure of the Department of Juvenile Justice mission and is symptomatic of a much larger problem in our state, end quote. Quote, the existence of the Highlands Youth Academy in its current state is a disgrace, end quote. Quote, the Highlands Youth Academy should cease to exist, end quote. Quote, Department of Juvenile Justice should require that its contractors put in place strong policies requiring that law enforcement be immediately contacted to investigate felony crimes taking place in their facilities. End quote. Ladies and gentlemen, instead of being concerned that a grand jury had to hear this, instead of reacting to all of the warnings and all of the encouragement and all of the supervision recommendations that we gave them along the way while investigating this, the Department of Juvenile Justice and G4S went along their merry way of denial, cover up, conspiracy to deny, not happening, not us, over-exaggerated. All of us in the grand jury were wrong, and they were right. And the Highlands Youth Academy continued to operate, and it continued to operate in much the same manner that it had before, despite all of our warnings and despite a grand jury presentation. So November 2015, after all of that, the sheriff's office received notification that there was sexual activity between the youth that were detained in the facility, the juveniles, the children, as DJJ likes to call them, and the staff members, to include the guards or youth counselors or whatever the nomenclature is you want to use for those that's supervising. That's correct. We began the investigation of November 2015. Despite the fact that we began the investigation in November 2015 and it wrapped up in November 2016, despite us giving them notice, they kept the suspect right there supervising the juveniles. In fact, one of the same ones who this person was to have had sex with. February 2016. There was a large disturbance at the facility once again, resulting in the injury to a staff member. That staff member had a leg injury, had to go to the hospital. Sheriff's office was notified. Oh, by the way, during this period of time, after the grand jury presentation, all of a sudden our calls dropped precipitously. They quit calling us. Let me back up before November 2015. I missed one. June 2015, another employee that was battered by a guard, if you will, was battered by a juvenile who had a pacemaker, and he was hit in the pacemaker directly, had to check off of the clock and walk a quarter of a mile to the guard shack to call the sheriff's office because they still wouldn't allow him to report criminal conduct. So after February 2016 now, with the once again disturbance, detectives asked for a video, and the warden of the facility, as they call the administrator, the number one person, lied to the detectives. Said, no video covering that area, we don't have any video, video's broke, take your pick of the excuses. Detectives, through their investigation and from witnesses, learned that yes, there were video cameras, and yes, there were recordings, but by the time we figured all of that out, it had written over itself. So Norma had effectively, once again, tampered with evidence and hindered our criminal investigation. March 2016, Department of Juvenile Justice and DCF learned that a majority of the incidents that occurred there were never ever reported to them, despite Florida law requiring reports. May 2016, we wrapped up our case and we arrested Deidre Bockham for 2 counts of sexual misconduct by an employee against the juvenile and smuggling contraband into the facility. She has since pled guilty and is designated as a sexual offender. Oh, by the way, she confessed to us. May 2016. Johnny Hart, who is an assistant administrator, is accused of slamming a juvenile on the ground. The juvenile was injured, and saying, "You're going to learn, this is my program," as he pummeled the juvenile. September 2016, DCF became involved all along this way, as we reported, and several of the employees were suspended while their investigation unraveled. April 2017, G4S sold all of their youth services in North America to BHSB Holdings for $56.5 million. This is big-time business, big-time money, and the children are an afterthought. It was purchased by TrueCore Behavioral Solutions. August 2017, Norma Wynn, who is now not a part of G4S, was charged with and arrested in Highlands County on our warrants charged with 3 counts of destroying and tampering evidence, 2 counts of failure to report child abuse and neglect, 3 counts of use of public record to commit a felony, 1 count of tampering in felony proceedings, 2 counts of willful neglect of juvenile offenders, and 1 count of false information to a law enforcement officer. Jose Sanchez was charged with 2 counts of destroying and tampering with evidence, 2 counts of failing to report child abuse, neglect, 2 counts of use of public record to commit a felony, 2 counts of willful neglect of a juvenile offender. He is retired. He was arrested in Highlands County. Our buddy Johnny Hart, who was an assistant administrator, was charged with 1 count of destroying and tampering evidence, 1 count of child abuse, 2 counts of use of public record to commit a felony, 2 counts of willful neglect of a juvenile offender. This represents the top 3 people at the Highlands Youth Academy. By the way, Johnny was arrested in Okaloosa County because now he's the top guy in the program there. Ladies and gentlemen, the allegations were in the hundreds. The witnesses were in the dozens and dozens and dozens. We boiled all of that down with the state attorney's office, and it took a very long time to what we thought was solid prosecutable cases. There are many, many, many other cases that theoretically could have been brought, but quite frankly, we had to cut the investigation off and try to bring this thing to an end because new criminal allegations were coming in faster than we could investigate them. Here's what I know. Prolific juvenile offenders have to be detained. They have to go to a program or they're going to commit crimes in the community. But when we arrest these juvenile offenders and we push hard to have them locked up in programs, and we do, our expectation is that they're going to be safe. Our expectation is that there's going to be organization and structure and discipline, and they're going to be taught right from wrong and how to go by the rules. Our expectation is that they're going to go to school, that they're going to learn a trade, because that's what we're paying these third-party people to do. And I suggest to you that that's not occurring like we all think it is. I'm not naive enough to think the Highlands Youth Academy is the only one that's run like this in the state of Florida. I hope that is the only one that is run this poorly in the state of Florida. My suggestion, and it needs to start today, this afternoon, since DJJ doesn't pay any attention to a grand jury presentation, nor to us, since the private contractors didn't pay any attention to a grand jury presentation, nor to us, despite all of that warning in advance, they continued on to now we have where the top staff is criminally charged with significant crimes. I suggest there needs to be an independent monitor from the Office of Attorney General, from FDLE, from federal government. Someone needs to be on those campuses every day that can report directly around the hierarchy of DJJ directly to the governor, and directly to the governor, not only to the governor of the state of Florida, but to the people, to make sure that they are following the law, because it's obvious they aren't, and they don't have any intention to, and they ignored us. And it's obvious that the checks and balances were not and are not in place by the Department of Juvenile Justice, because they totally ignored us after we shot many shots over the bow to include the grand jury presentation. And private enterprise made millions and millions of dollars off of the state of Florida and the taxpayer while failing the juveniles they were supposed to be taking care of. And that's all I got to say. And I know, yes, ma'am.
There are going to be additional arrests.
Do you know we wrestle with this case for a long time? If further information comes to our attention and we can build a case with the approval of the state attorney's office, yes. But the more pressing issue is we've got to stop the bleeding. And we've done everything we can at this level, short of making arrest. Now we've made arrest, and we made arrest along the way of juveniles who were committing felonies and it going unreported, of staff members that were having sex with juveniles and it was going unreported. But the bigger issue is we need independent oversight that reports directly to the governor, directly to the cabinet, directly to an independent federal source. Someone needs to make these folks follow the law. The law's in place. The law's very specific. But when you look, when you dig down and look, the people we have that's supposed to be working with our children are required to have much, 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 much less training than our detention deputies that are working with adults, when in fact they should have more. So they pay just barely over minimum wage. They just barely give them enough training to get them certified. It's painfully obvious that there's no detail, background, polygraph, psychological before these folks are put into this facility. Instead of a disciplined parental relationship with these juveniles, they got the guards, the counselors, dressed like them. And in some of the videos, we had a very difficult time because of the youth of the guards, of the supervisors, of telling who was the inmate and who was the supervisor. And the reality of it is, I don't think they knew either.
Sheriff Judge, do you think that your agency's investigation will be precedent-setting and possibly having similar investigations at other facilities around the state?
I can tell you that we didn't receive the support from DJJ, from the state, or anyone else, even after the presentment, that it deserved. Everyone was silent. So I tell you what's going to make the difference. The news media, the watchdogs, who need to say, we need sunshine, we need oversight, we need someone else to be held accountable administratively. We've not even touched administrative violations. It is an absolute, unequivocal train wreck. And I am not suggesting for a minute that DJJ knew all that was going on, because if they did, I suspect they would have canceled the contract. But if these private people had reported them, it would have shown their failures. But you know what? Their bottom line looked good on the spreadsheets while they fail the kids. There's some things you can't outsource. And the responsibility to look out for the welfare and the best interests of those we incarcerate is the government's responsibility, not private enterprise. And that sounds parochial, but I can tell you what, when the government's responsible for it and the government has to adhere to the regulations, it seems like there's a whole lot more adhering to the regulations than there is when there's profit at stake.
There was a video of, I think, a fight within there within the past couple of years. Do you know if it was Johnny Hart? As you mentioned, he had an altercation with the kid.
I don't think that was Johnny Hart, but we did release a video of those that were fighting, and that was one of the videos where it was difficult to tell who were the inmates and who were supposed to be guarding the inmates.
And these people, you're saying, were basically not reporting incidents like that one?
By the who knows how many. Not only were they not reporting them, they ignored us when we told them, this is the rule, this is the law. Make no mistake, we don't need more laws. We need the people to follow the ones that are there. And the legislators who are allocating the money should be all over this. Those that want to get elected to the legislature and re-elected to the legislature should be all over this. Those who want to be governor should be all over this. We're all over it. We've been screaming and hollering and jumping up and down and bringing criminal charges and stopping riots. Nobody pays attention. Come on, people. This is our children.
At what point can the law step in and shut it down if it needs to be, or is that appropriate?
DJJ certainly has contract language that would allow them to step in and stop it. But keep in mind, when you turn your infrastructure over to private providers, what do you do next? Private providers have all the labor, they have all the infrastructure, so you can't just overnight set up a state DJJ residential program. It's going to take time. I can tell you G4S owes the taxpayer of the state of Florida a rebate. And they owe apologies to the kids who theoretically could have learned a trade and learn right from wrong and be a productive citizen. Well, just the antithesis of all that occurred in that environment. It got to be survival of the fittest. Now, that's a frightening thought. When these parents who said, my kid's on the wrong track, I'm so excited, they're in a program, we'll send them away, they'll be disciplined, they're going to get the right training, they're going to get professional help that, hi, me as a parent don't know and haven't been successful at, only to throw them in that cage of non-reporting, hiding. It's sad.
Would you prefer the oversight, like you mentioned, with an independent monitor, or would you prefer the complete shutdown and reestablishing a new system?
I would prefer that they get oversight there now. And I think once the appropriate oversight is there and the appropriate reporting to the cabinet directly, the governor directly, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate directly, I think from that point it will correct itself.
Did you at one point offer your services to, remember you mentioned that in 2015, like you guys would go in and operate the facility for DJJ?
What we did is we took 60 of the kids in at no cost to them because they had no infrastructure and no way to deal with them. They were running paper thin so they could have a profit, a bigger profit. So they didn't have backup. They didn't have other ways to deal with this major event that occurred. So we stepped in and helped. And we're still ready to help. I want these kids that are creating havoc in the community to go away to a program where they receive appropriate training, appropriate education, appropriate therapy, appropriate discipline. I want that. The community wants that. And that's not what's happening today. And if we could list all of the allegations, you would go, oh my gosh, I cannot believe all of that.